Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some underhyped, underappreciated, underrated books. I'm actually going to kick off the list with Vinland Saga. Recently, an anime adaptation has come out. There's a few episodes on Amazon right now, and I haven't read everything that's out in the actual mangas. I've only read a little bit, and the entire series isn't completed yet, but what I've read, I've thoroughly enjoyed. I think the artwork is great, and what I've seen of the anime after 3 episodes, because that's all that's currently up, is most definitely going to be a favorite of mine. We follow a young boy named Thorfinn, who is a Viking's son, but his father is essentially a retired Viking. He's not really all about that killing and raiding stuff anymore. He's kind of a quiet, strong, but peaceful man now, and that's not quite how life is going to stay. Next up on the list would be Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan. This is a story that I personally have talked about quite a few times here on my channel, and I think it still deserves to be talked about more. This story follows a character named Valen, and it is definitely one of those setups that I'm not particularly fond of. Ironically, the setup is that it's a man who has accomplished things, who is now telling somebody his life story. I don't actually usually go for those kinds of setups because I find the plots to those stories to be a little here and there, and while I'm not a plot-driven reader, I still like our characters to have a goal, and in this particular story, you don't quite get that. But Valen as a character is just so fantastic. He is very reserved, and he is very observant, and he's incredibly hardworking, and he's just a good guy. He's just a good guy that you get to see grow up and become a pretty fine man, and you really start to feel for him because he gets caught up in some things that are not his fault, and despite having a good heart, there are others out there that don't have good hearts, and they take advantage of his current position in life, and it's just done so well. Next on the list would be The Therithmatist by Brandon Sanderson. This is a story by him that's geared toward younger readers, but I think regardless of your age, there are so many themes within the story that are definitely appealing to people of all ages. There are things people can relate to, no matter if they're younger or they're older, and there's also just a fantastic magic system and really fun characters, a really fun premise, a really interesting world. In typical Sanderson fashion, the magic system is fascinating, complex, it has its somewhat science-y feel to it, but then also there are some elements of it that are just magical. Going in a completely different direction now, we have a grimdark book, and that would be The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. This is a story that definitely has an audience. I just don't really see it talked about that much on BookTube, and I think it's really fun. I think it's really great, and it did not start out that way for me. When I first picked it up, I was pretty bored. And it's not that Joe Abercrombie has a stuffy writing style or is super pretentious or anything. It's just the first book is extremely character driven, and the characters I did not like for a long time. I didn't care about them. They had no goals. They had nothing they were trying to do. They had no agency. You just followed them around on whatever tasks they were given. So it sounds like I'm not really hyping this book up at all, and it seems like, why are you recommending this book? Did you even like it? By the end of the book, I cared so much about these characters. Even the ones I hated, I was like, gosh, I hate that guy. But I had emotions toward them. And then I actually wanted to know what was going to happen to them, and I cared about them. Even though, if you asked me the plot of that story, I'd be like, I don't know. It's one of those stories. It doesn't really have a main plot. If there is one, it will be revealed in the other books. But in that first one, it's all about the characters. And it is grimdark, but it's grimdark without being extremely gratuitous or feeling like you're trying to be shocked into disgust, basically. I just think Joe Abercrombie finds the perfect balance of it being extremely raw and gritty and exploring gray morality without trying to be disturbing. Next up, we have another manga, and if you have watched my channel for a while, you have certainly heard me talk about it a lot, and you may have seen some people talk about it, but I am telling you, if you have not checked out this series yet, or maybe if you started it, but then were like, I don't know, not really my thing, keep going, because Full Metal Alchemist is one of my favorite series of all time. So that's not the only reason you should read it. It's like, I like it, so you try it because you'll like it too. Initially, you follow these two brothers who tried to bring their mother back using alchemy, and things went terribly wrong, and one brother lost an arm and a leg, and the other brother lost his entire body. They had to attach his soul to a body of armor. And so these two brothers are now trying to get their original bodies back while also getting caught up in some political happenings in their world. There are so many hilarious moments throughout the series, but there's also a lot of really emotional moments. There's a lot of range of emotions. It's really great, and if you find that you don't quite do well with mangas, there's also a fantastic anime adaptation called Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood that follows the series really well. Next up, we have the Seven Realms series by Cinda Williams Chima. This is a series that is completed, which is great because a lot of times we as readers, we end up loving something and then we have to wait until the next installment. We love it, we have to wait till the next installment. So if you're interested in checking the series out, all of them are out. The series follows two main characters, although there are more perspectives than just that, so it is a multiple point of view story. But our two main characters would be Reisa and Han. Han is a street thief. He has a reputation. He's not exactly known for being the best of people, but when you get to know him, you know that he's doing what he has to protect his family, to protect himself. It's just kind of a product of his upbringing to put on this persona of being tough and somebody you don't want to mess with, where Reisa is a little bit of a spoiled princess, and their worlds get flipped upside down. They have some interactions with each other initially, but eventually their worlds collide in really much more serious ways. Next, we have Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. You follow our main character named Kelsey, who as soon as the book starts, it is essentially the day that she is supposed to go claim her throne. She has been living in hiding in order to live in a protected manner so that people don't kill her, because there's a lot of political strife. This book is basically entirely political intrigue, and Kelsey is just one of those characters that you can get behind. She has a good heart. She wants to work hard to do the right thing, and sometimes nowadays it's more about how gray is this character, how bad can they be before I don't like them anymore. That sometimes feels like what we're leaning towards, and she's just not that at all. Not saying she's perfect. She's definitely got some insecurities that I think, while sometimes frustrating, are relatable. They are something that a lot of people struggle with, so you can relate to her in that manner, but also she's somebody that you want to succeed. Next on the list would be Shadow of the Fox by Julie Kagawa. This is the first book in what will eventually be a trilogy. The first two books are out. The third one is set to be released hopefully within the next year or two. The first book follows two main characters, one of which is a very naive, shape-shifting trickster fox girl, and the other being a character who was raised by a shadow clan. They're very reserved. They're kind of emotionally stunted, and the two of them get paired together on this mission that involves a magical scroll. And as far as angstiness goes in stories, it's not like these two characters are just instantly falling in love and making out or anything like that, but you kind of want them to be together. I mean, at least I did, and it feels very much like your kind of samurai type stories that you find in a lot of anime, where the girl is really sweet and innocent and the guy's like kind of mysterious and brooding. And it's that kind of story. And if you're looking for something like that, Shadow the Fox, I think, will not disappoint. Next on the list would be another anime slash manga, and that would be Claymore. This is an example of an anime where it's not exactly the same as the manga, but I still think it's worth checking out. It starts off a little but as you keep going, I definitely think it starts to pull you in. The setup for the story is that we are in a world that is kind of plagued by monsters, and there are these female monster hunters known as Claymores who have to try and protect the world from these monsters. But as a part of their group, they are not allowed to use their enhanced powers to harm people, which kind of can be an issue because sometimes people know this and try to take advantage. There's also a lot of mysteries going on within the particular group that is kind of like the governing board for the Claymore. So you get a lot of action, you get a lot of really interesting monsters. The monsters themselves feel like they're constantly leveling up as the story goes on. And our main character, we don't know much about her initially. She's kind of very quiet and stoic and just does her thing. But the more the story goes on, the more you get to know about her and the more she becomes involved in things that are pretty dangerous. So it's definitely an edge of your seat type story. There's always something going on, and it is quite violent. It is more, I would say, on the mature side, but it's still, is it weird to say it's still a lot of fun? I still think it's such a fun story. And lastly, we have Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I feel like every time I do any kind of recommendations video, I always talk about Warbreaker, and that's because I just think it has a lot of appeal to a lot of different people. It's of course not going to be for everybody, no book is, but this is a story that's adult fantasy that I think is still extremely accessible for people who don't often read adult fantasy. If you're used to YA, I think this is a great transition book. It's currently a standalone also, and it serves perfectly fine as a standalone. Even if we never get the sequel, that is fine. The story on its own, you go from beginning to end and you're good. It also has an incredible magic system, so fascinating and complex. It's maybe not as straightforward as the magic system in Mistborn, but it's more magical, I think. And the way it works, it has to do with basically breathing life into inanimate objects using something called breath. Every person has a single breath, but you can take breath from other people and you can acquire more breath, and then you can transfer that breath to stuff and you can take that breath back. And the more breath you have, the more your senses are heightened. There's just so many layers to the magic system, which I think makes it always even more interesting to learn about as the story progresses. On top of all of that, I think the book is incredibly funny, and it takes a lot of tropes and it flips them on their heads. So the setup for the story is you have a princess who her whole life has known that she will have to fulfill a marriage alliance with a foreign kingdom. Not the most original plot, right? We've seen that before. It's been there, but it's still, it's still engaging, still interesting. And where that this kind of gets turned around is that instead of sending this daughter who has been groomed her whole life for this purpose, the king's like, I kind of don't like your sister as much. I'm going to send her instead. And this sister is clueless. She has never paid attention to basically anything to do with politics. That's the one that the dad sends. So she's thrown in the middle of this heathen kingdom where they have these people who are returned, and they used to be dead, but then they came back, and now in order to survive, they have to take people's breaths, and they're basically gods and goddesses, and it's super colorful and really interesting and different, and this girl is trying to navigate it all, and there's so many politics that she's suddenly involved in. And then the other sister, who is Miss Perfect, now is like, I'm gonna go rescue my sister. So it's got a really fun premise. The gods in the book and the goddesses, they are definitely very entertaining. Just know that the story is basically all intrigue. There's some action, but not a lot. So if you're looking for a story where people are going to be fighting it out, not necessarily the book for you. That's it for 10 books that I think personally deserve more recognition. Let me know what some of yours are. If you're interested in hearing more recommendations for underhyped books, I do have an older video where I talk about some different stories. I still think those stories are definitely worth mentioning, so I'll have that linked down below if you're interested in getting even more recommendations. But anyway, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.